Thank you very much. Unfortunately, my passive Polish is better, but I'm not enough good at presenting Polish language. So I would like to talk in English. First of all, another, how can I say, a remark. I'm a lawyer. So sorry for that. My approach will be a legal one, and I will focus on regulatory issues. And secondly, we could hear the problems in Ukraine. So, however, in Hungary, we have a war emergency situation since last May, but actually our greatest problem is not to defend or critical infrastructure against Russian rockets and Iranian suicide drones. I would like to talk first of all on the methodology and principles. As I told you, my primary methodology of my presentation is a jurisprudential one. So I will focus mainly on the regulation on that situation. But because I'm an administrative lawyer, which is even worse than being a lawyer, I will even talk on some administrative sciences issues, so on the practice of this regulation. And partially, I would like to share some data on economic outputs and revenues. If we look at critical infrastructure is actually a very modern one because wars were mainly reacted on infrastructure. But actually, since the 19th century, since the railroads, the defense and the role of the infrastructure became very important. For example, in Hungary, we had a freedom fight against the Habsburgs, and in 1848 and in 1849, and Hungary was one of the first countries which fought the war and the main battles, especially in our spring campaign for the railroad from Budapest to Vienna. Infrastructure has a very important role, and even by the technical revolutions, and especially by the communication technologies revolution, it became even more important. Without infrastructure, our lives cannot be lived, or at least not as we have mentioned. For example, even as a lawyer, we could realize that even bridges and other infrastructures were very important. After the Second World War, at my university, we couldn't have faculty councils only for the professors at the Pest side in Budapest because the bridges were destroyed. So it is very important, and therefore the regulation focuses on that particular infrastructure. Therefore, infrastructure and safety and adequate living is hand in hand. So without critical infrastructure, that safe and adequate living standard of a country's population cannot be secured. And as I have mentioned, and I would like to talk about that, infocommunication technologies and the revolution of ICTs, and especially the platforms, the involvement of platforms influenced very significantly that regulation. And secondly, we have a new situation because these critical infrastructures are mainly networks. And even that networks are even more and more globalized networks. So a harm in a national critical infrastructure could even influence other countries' infrastructure situation. So if we look at, for example, on the Russian attacks against the Ukrainian electricity system, it even influenced the European electricity network as well. So that the global situation requires other solutions and requires more and more inter and supranational solutions for the defense of critical infrastructures. And even the safety issues in the system of collective security requires even an influence of the collective safety and collective security issues on national regulation. And Europe and the European Union and the common market in the European Union and the European internal market resulted even an internal market of energy, of transportation, and of telecommunication. So, because we had one market with a standardized situation, therefore, the defense of this critical infrastructure should not be the formerly national framework, even because of that integration, a European regulation is required. Therefore, Europe passed a joint directive on the defense of critical infrastructure, that is the 2008 per 114 EC directive, which defines a European common framework for the defense of critical infrastructure. What is critical infrastructure? We could have narrow and wide interpretation. The European regulation has a very, very wide interpretation because critical infrastructure belongs to the maintenance of vital societal functions, health, safety, security, economic, or social well-being of people. So it's a very, very wide interpretation because even critical infrastructure could be, how can I say, a very long list of objects. Therefore, sorry for that, because we had a very wide approach and a very broad interpretation, therefore, the directive has a regulation on the identification and designation of critical infrastructure. So the nations, the national agencies, and later the European bodies should identify that critical infrastructures, and after that to define these critical infrastructures, which belongs to the regime of the directive and to the regime of the how can I say, harmonized European situation, but regulated by national regulatory issues. And as I have mentioned, we have a European framework, but because it's a directive, sorry for that for not lawyers, directive in the European Union means that those regulations should be implemented by the national legislations. The directive has only the common framework for the regulation. So because it's a directive, even national regulation is required. Because I'm a Hungarian, I know the best the Hungarian regulation, and the Hungarian regulation is the Act 166 of 2012, which defines the defense of the critical infrastructure in Hungary. And because I told that I was focusing on crisis digital transformation and the centralization of these systems, I would like to talk about those cybersecurity issues. However, as I told, we are not, how can I say, Hungary, we haven't received Russian rockets. Even Poland could get near Bialystok, but we didn't get any Russian rockets. But it's part of the Russian strategies, the cyber attacks and the fake news issue. So we can see that hybrid situation, and therefore, because hybrid warfare is more and more eminent, therefore, I would like to focus on cybersecurity issues. Why? Because, sorry for that, I'm a great fan of TV shows and science fiction TV shows. One of my favorite was the Battlestar Galactica reimagined series in 2004. And actually, even in Battlestar Galactica, we could see the difficulties even in a war of networks and chained objects of critical infrastructure. Because the Cylons, the androids who attacked the humanity, attacked first a hacker. So hacked the system, and they could actually shut down these critical infrastructures. So why? Because platforms were developed, and the platforms had backsides, and even that backsides were vulnerable for cyber attacks. Therefore, these platforms are very important in efficiency of these policies, energy, mineral resources, and so on. But these platforms are even vulnerability issues. We could see in the case of Estonia. In the case of Estonia, they attacked the energy system, the electricity systems of Estonia. And it was very, very interesting because the Russians found the Achilles heels of the digitalized Estonian administration system. and the Achilles heels were the municipalities, the small municipalities in Estonia. And it's even very important in Hungary because Hungary has a very, very fragmented municipal system. We have a country with a population of 9.7 million people, and we have more than 3,000 municipal bodies. And even the number of the municipal offices are around 2,000. So, yes, around 2,000. So we had a very fragmented system with a very limited knowledge on cybersecurity. Therefore, centralized cybersecurity solutions are required and the centralized supervision. Actually, as I have mentioned, the COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukrainian war showed that critical infrastructure is not only a target of the traditional warfare, so rockets and suicide drones, but even it could be the target of hybrid attacks, especially cybersecurity attacks. Therefore, the regulation should, spotlight on that problem. And as I told you, platformization. Past decade, the development of the ICT technologies and the revolution in AI resulted a very significant transformation of management systems of everything, actually. So platforms evolved first in business sectors. And actually, if you look at on these platforms, these transformed the business management and especially the company management as well. Now, the forward differences between companies and companies actually disappeared because almost everybody uses SAP systems and other corporate management systems. So it's very standardized. And even it is very interesting and very important that critical infrastructure companies uses that same situation as well. So they're even using SAP and other privately developed platforms, which defines even the production methods as well. And that is a very important question in a modern European market technology. Mainly, these critical infrastructures belongs to private providers, privately owned providers, and they are using privately developed systems. But these providers and these companies are important in the maintenance of the society, of the networks, and of the web of the society. Therefore, it is a great question. We can say that platform centralization. Sorry for that. Even I can imagine platform centralization. I'm teaching at a university, and especially after the COVID, we are using platforms as well for exams, for other e-learning systems. So we are using Moodle and Canvas and sometimes Unipoor. And if I would like to ask whether there are other university teachers here, they are even using Moodle, Canvas, and other systems, and therefore our exams and questions and tests are very close to each other because of that platforms. It was unbelievable 10 years before, actually. So every aspect of the life has been influenced by the platformization, and that question, that private or public issue, is very important because even these platforms are mainly developed by private providers and secondly, by not national providers. So they have a very centralized market. For example, SOP is a German company, actually, and all of the world are using that SOP softwares. And therefore, it's a great question. First of all, how can we regulate a private provider, which is not a national one? And secondly, how can we regulate a globalized situation? And standardization and interoperability could be even a threat and vulnerability, not only as an efficiency question, which should be solved. So how can we solve it? Actually, Europe tried to answer that question with a multi-layer regulatory system. And as I have mentioned, critical infrastructure has attention. And last but not least, We have specialized cybersecurity regulation on the networks of these critical infrastructures. And even we have sector advantages defined by the sectoral national and European regulation. Sorry, I have almost 1 minute longer than my planned 15 minutes. So I hope it was enough interesting for not lawyers. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity being here.